Well,
Earth holds no treasures but perish with using. However precious they be, yet there's a country to which I am going. Heaven holds all to me. Heaven holds all to me. Brighter its glory will be. You'd better be tagging this video. Joy without treasure will be my treasure. Heaven holds all treasures but me. Out on the hills of that wonderful country, happy, contented, and free. Loved ones are waiting and watching my coming. Heaven holds all to me. Heaven holds all to me. Brighter its glories will be. Joy without measure will be my treasure. Heaven holds all to me. If you are hearing earth holds no treasures, then sister love, you are live with me. CJ fat fingered the end of the video. We are Why should I long for the world with its sorrows, when in that home o'er the sea, millions are singing the wonderful story. Heaven holds all to me. Heaven holds all to me. Brighter its glory will be. Joy without measure will be my treasure. Heaven holds all to me.
we've had a fun night so far, I think.
Now let it not be said that I do not have the powers of ad lib.
I apologize. I meant to leave on my phone and I pressed leave, and then I recognized I did it a split second after, and I'm like, oh no.
What happens is when we join StreamYard on our phones, um, in order for us to leave, we have to hit our phone's back button to exit out. What CJ did is actually clicked on the end button, tapped the end button.
What was a big red?
It's a big red button, says end, and he accidentally hit that instead of hitting the back button on his phone.
Yeah.
And that, of course, ended the whole stream.
Sorry. Do we have everybody back?
Well, we have all that was there earlier.
Darlene, Reba?
We have Sam, Reba, and Darlene joined us in that order. So,
Okay, great.
but that was quite fun, entertaining.
Yeah, I know.
We are not going to let him live this down for a while.
I know. I can't talk about Levi doing it now. Well,
And as I said, you can't say that I don't have the powers of ad lib. I thought I did fairly well with ad libbing into that song.
Where'd my PowerPoint go now?
You ended it.
Oh, there it is.
Sam says CJ is zealous, trying to be part of God's service.
Fine. Oh boy, that was good.
That was good.
Mic issues. Angie does replays, right? She'll have fun with this
Oh,
one.
she will have fun with this one. I expect to have a lot of laughter on when we do the ad libbing on that part.
Oh boy. Did I get. Oh, I gotta reshare this to the chat group.
If you are hearing me, earth holds no treasures. Then you are alive, sister. Anyway, okay.
You have no PowerPoint anymore but yourself. Well, now I have it up.
Ding! Somebody needs to remember to mute their phone, and there, I have done that.
Will be my treasure.
Earworm!
We
It is, isn't it?
the study, or we?
Well, we are. It's already 20 minutes past our normal start time because somebody fat fingered the end button.
Yeah, sorry about that.
After he had mic issues.
Yeah, I don't know what that was.
Mic issues. Good thing you didn't have Sally issues.
We are in the book of Acts tonight, right?
Yes, that's why it's an Acts stream, Acts study. Alicia's on the ball. She's playing tech right now, and so CJ, take it away. You're the MC tonight.
Well, I guess I don't need it. Oh,
That's too deep a subject for my shallow mind.
what?
You said, well, that's too deep a subject for this shallow mind.
Oh boy. Well, recently, last week, we were in Acts chapter 8, and in particular,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, CJ. That just struck me as really funny.
no.
Well, recently, last week, we were. Oh, good thing it wasn't a long time in the past last week.
Where's that mute button? Oh, there it is. Isn't that so much better, guys? So, anywho, last week we were in Acts chapter 8, and we were uh, looking at the Ethiopian eunuch and his conversion with Philip, and we noticed that this particular conversion uh, involved a lot of figures. It involved the whole an angel. It involved the Holy Spirit, and, and let's read, y'all. Yeah. And so two divine beings were involved in uh this conversion account. And so what ends up happening is Philip ends up baptizing the eunuch. And he starts where we all should start with where they're at. And so where the eunuch was reading up in his chariot was Isaiah 53, verse 7. And so he makes sure to help him understand that passage. And then he just preached Jesus, and we noticed last week that preaching Jesus includes baptism, uh, because he preached Jesus to him in Acts chapter 8, verse 35, and then the next verse, see, here's water. Preach Jesus, see, here's water. So we know one thing, he preached about Jesus, how to obey his gospel.
Hey, Alicia, come here.
And so the eunuch baptized him. With Philip baptized the eunuch, excuse me, and then Philip went away, and the eunuch saw him no more. We talked a little bit about the fact that it wasn't like I had originally thought. It wasn't like the Holy Spirit beamed him up someplace and teleported him. He just went on his way, and we know where he went. He went to verse 40, Azotus. As, no, that's not right.
Azotus.
Uh, Azotus. Azotus, passing through the city, preached the gospel to the cities till he came to Caesarea. We're going to read about tonight a man that we saw a chapter previous, and I'll let Levi take us through that.
So we begin in Acts chapter 9 as soon as Alicia brings up Acts chapter 9. Ha ha! No, that's Acts chapter 8. There we go. I'll be reading from the King James, Alicia, if you want to switch over to that. Thank you. And Saul, yet breathing out threatenings and slaughter against the disciples of the Lord, went unto the high priest and desired of him letters to Damascus to the synagogues, that if he found any of this way, whether they were men or women, he might bring them bound unto Jerusalem. And as he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly there shined round about him a light from heaven. And he fell to the earth, and heard a voice saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? Verse 5, Alicia. And he said, Who art thou, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus whom thou persecutest. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? And the Lord said unto him, Arise, and go into the city, and it shall be told thee what thou must do. And the men which journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no man. And Saul arose from the earth, and when his eyes were opened, he saw no man, but they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And he was 3 days without sight, neither did he eat nor drink. And there was a certain disciple at Damascus named Ananias, and to him said the Lord in a vision, Ananias. And he said, Behold, here I am here, Lord. And the Lord said unto him, Arise, and go into the street which is called Straight, and inquire in the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus, for behold, he prayeth, and have seen in a vision a man named Ananias coming in and putting his hand on him that he might receive his sight. And then Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard by many of this man how much evil he hath done to thy saints at Jerusalem. And here he hath authority from the chief priests to bind all that call on thy name. But the Lord said unto him, Go thy way, for he is a chosen vessel unto me to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel. For I will show him how great things he must suffer for my name's sake. And Ananias went his way and entered into the house, and putting his hands on him said, Brother Saul, the Lord, even Jesus, that appeared unto thee in the way as thou camest, hath sent me, that thou mightest receive thy sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit. And immediately there fell from his eyes as it had been scales, and he received sight forthwith, and arose and was baptized. I want to stop right there because that's kind of a good stopping place. Well, it matches too for the text there. What is it? Compilers break. What we have here in Acts chapter 9, beginning in verse 1, is picking up kind of where we left off at the end of 7, beginning of 8. So if Alicia will move us back over to verse 1. No, Alicia, we're still in Acts. Take us to Acts 8, verse 1 first. I want to show, in Acts chapter 8 and verse 1, we tie this together as soon as she switches to Acts chapter 8. Saul was consenting unto his death, and at that time there was a great persecution against the church which was at Jerusalem. And they were all scattered abroad throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Skipping down to verse 3, as for Saul, he made havoc of the church. 8 verse 3, Alicia. Stay on the e-sword, please, my dear. Thank you. As for Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering into every house and hailing men and women. That means arresting men and women, committed them into prison. Okay. So then in chapter 9, verse 1, we pick up with the account of Saul. 9 verse 1. Verse 1. Acts chapter 9, verse 1. Thank you. Saul, yet breathing out threatenings and slaughter against the disciples of the Lord, went unto the high priest and desired of him letters to Damascus, to the synagogues, that if he found any of this way, whether man or woman, he might bring them bound unto Jerusalem. So he wasn't just threatening the disciples, he was killing the disciples. Just like what happened with Stephen at the end of Acts chapter 7, here we have a period of time between Acts chapter 8, verse 1, and Acts chapter 9, verse 1, wherein Saul is constantly breathing out threatenings and slaughterings of the church, of the disciples of the Lord. People were dying simply because they were of the disciples of Christ. That's a pretty serious persecution, wouldn't you say? No wonder people were scattered abroad. They were leaving. And what we see here, dare I say it, is the providence of God. Imagine, if you would, what would have happened had the people, had Saul not threatened threatened the slaughter against the church. What do you think would have happened, CJ?
Well, first off, Acts 8 verse 4 wouldn't have happened. They wouldn't have gone everywhere preaching the word, and Saul probably would not have wrote 13 letters of our New Testament as he'll be converted toward the end of this section. Spoiler alerts. So the persecution was very instrumental in the spreading of the gospel.
So I'm going to bring in an Old Testament account, and I want you to compare the two accounts. Sam says they would not have scattered. Alicia, if you would take us over to Genesis, and we're going to go to Genesis. Let me get the right chapter. Genesis chapter 11. But before we go to Genesis chapter 11, I want to touch on Genesis chapter 9 and verse 1. What does Genesis 9 and verse 1 say? Where do you suppose Genesis is? She needs to to go through the books of the Old Testament in her mind and the songs. Genesis 9 and verse 1. God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. What does this mean? Thank you, Sam.
Well, they were going to fill the earth, right?
Right. Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Verse 7 of Genesis chapter 9. And you, be ye fruitful and multiply and bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply therein. Again, we have a command of God. What is it?
Multiply
Fill the earth, right?
the earth.
Genesis chapter 11. And I want you to begin to read verse 3 for us, CJ. I want 3 and 4.
And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower
Genesis 11, verses 3 and 4, Alicia.
with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the earth. Well,
So,
they're kind of disobeying that command, aren't they?
aren't they? Yes. So they're gonna remain in one place, contrary to the will of God, right? Okay. Now we've seen this. This is the command of God that they are to go forth and fill the earth. And they decide to remain in one place contrary to the will of God. Now, let's contrast that account with the early church. What is God's command in Matthew chapter 28, verses 18 through 20?
Go
Where?
into all the world, preach the gospel.
All the world preaching the gospel.
And that's what the early church did in 8 verse 4.
But what were they doing prior to that in the first 7 chapters of Acts?
Well, they were hanging out in Jerusalem, weren't they?
Well, yes, they were. They had everything in common. They were all happy and together in one place in Jerusalem. So God did what in Genesis chapter 11 to affect his will, to make his will felt upon the earth?
Disperse them.
By changing their languages.
Right.
Okay, what did he do in Acts chapter 9 or 8 that made his or affected his will upon the early church?
Disperse them.
Via persecution.
Right.
So what we see in both accounts is that God will work his will in the lives of men. When God gives a command, he expects it to be followed, correct? Reba says to fill the earth with Christians in response to my question about what God's command was in Matthew 28. Matthew 28. It was to fill the earth with Christians. Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every nation. Right? Matthew 28, Mark 16, both of those. They're the same command. Worded a little differently, but the same command. So what I see is the power of God. I see God's will being done on earth as it is in heaven. Man may have different designs and different thoughts, but God still says, no, my will is supreme. So Saul breathes out these threatenings, and it wasn't enough just to threaten, he slaughtered. He's going to get my yard all muddy. And so he desires of the synagogue, or of the Jews, of the high priest, letters to the Damascus. Now, here's the crazy thing. Damascus is a totally different city in a totally different country. CJ is going to bring you up here a map. Look at the difference. Damascus is above Israel. It's in Syria. Yet he goes to the chief priest. He says, I want letters. Get me letters to the authorities in Damascus. That way, if there's any of this way, what way? The way.
Right.
The Christian way. Those that adhere to Christ. Okay?
And,
Whether they be men or women, it doesn't matter. He wants these people, and he wants to drag them in chains back to Jerusalem. Verse 2, that he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. So he journeys there, and as he journeys, he comes near Damascus. And suddenly there shined round about him a light from heaven. This fly is really starting to annoy me. He comes near Damascus, this light shines round about him, and he falls to the earth. Whether he's riding horses, riding in a chariot, or just walking, whatever, the light is so bright that it causes him to stumble and drop to the earth. It's sudden. And he falls to the earth, he hears a voice saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? Now, we're going to examine this. We want to examine this particular event. And that means we're going to have to go into some other accounts. Because Paul recounts this before the Jews when he's captured in Acts chapter 22. In Acts chapter 22 and verse 6, not Genesis, my dears, we're back in Acts. Look at what he says. In Acts chapter 22, in verse 4, he tells the people, I persecuted this way unto death, binding and delivering into prison both men and women. Also the high priest doth bear me witness, and all the estate of the elders, from whom also I received letters unto the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring them which were bound unto Jerusalem. This is verse 5, for to be punished. Verse 6, and it came to pass that as I made my journey and was come near unto Damascus about noon, so now we know the time of day, it was about noon, suddenly there shone from heaven a great light round about me. Now let me ask you this. How easy is it to see a bright light in the middle of the day? Hey, Sister T.
not that easy.
It has to be pretty bright in order to be able to be seen at noonday, right?
That just shows how magnificent and different this light was.
Right.
If you ever tried to, I know this is no comparison, but it would almost be like if you take a bunch of glow sticks and bend them and break them, and you're out in the middle of a field. Well, you're looking at them, but they look like they're still uncracked. And this is happening at a much larger scale.
Mm-hmm. So we know this is a very, very, very bright light because it's noontime and he's seeing it. Okay. And he says, I fell unto the ground and heard a voice saying unto me, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? Now, I want to jump down to verse 9 for a moment. They that were with me saw indeed the light and were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spake to me. Now, this is interesting because here in Acts 9, it doesn't mention that. Does it?
Well, verse 7 says,
Yes, verse 7 says they heard the voice, but they didn't see the man. But it doesn't say they saw the light, does it?
It doesn't mention the light.
Right. Okay, so what we have here is two accounts. The first account says they heard the voice, but didn't see the light. The second account says that they saw the light and were afraid, but they heard not the voice. Now, why is that important? It's because of the next account that we're going to look when Paul retells it for the second time. And that is found in Acts chapter 26. So let's turn to Acts chapter 26, and we're going to pick up verse 14. Verse 13. And you're going to want to make sure that if you that you cross-reference all three of these accounts together. Okay, so we want to make sure that we cross-reference these accounts. So, beginning in verse 13 of chapter 26, after Paul has gotten through in verse 10 through 12, telling how he got the letters and went to Damascus. At midday, O king, again, we know it's noon, I saw in the way a light from heaven above the brightness of the sun, shining round about me and them which journeyed with me. And when we were all fallen to the earth, I heard a voice speaking unto me and saying in the Hebrew tongue, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. So when we put all three accounts together, we come up with the conclusion of this. One, they all saw the light. Right? Everyone saw the light. Everyone fell to the ground. Everyone was afraid. Two, they all heard the voice. They all heard somebody speaking, but only one person understood what the voice was saying. So, in other words, when it says that they that were with me saw indeed the light, were afraid, but they heard not the voice of him that spake unto me, it means that they didn't understand the voice. Why would they not understand the voice?
Because he said here it was in the Hebrew language.
So they wouldn't understand the Hebrew language. Who is it that he would be traveling with Paul, or Saul in this case, that would not understand the Hebrew language?
Well,
Good night, Sister T.
that be Gentiles?
That would be the Romans, wouldn't it?
Right.
Soldiers. Remember, what was Saul's purpose in going to Damascus?
Yeah, he was rounding up Christians, so of course he would have to have soldiers with him.
And
I've never put this together like this.
And if he was going to a different city in a different country where the Jews, the Pharisees, had no power, who did they have to approach to get this authority?
The Romans.
So therefore, ergo, those that were with him were the
Roman guards.
soldiers, right? So I wanted to bring that out. We had to actually go through and we had to look. If they had been Jewish soldiers, Jewish men, they would have understood Hebrew.
Right.
And so it's significant when we look at verse 14 of Acts chapter 26 that Jesus spoke to Saul in the Hebrew tongue. It wasn't that he closed the soldiers' ears, because they heard the voice, but they didn't understand it. As we see here in Acts chapter 9
You know,
and Acts chapter 22. Yes.
now that I think about it, it would have been probably easier, at least for me, if I made a chart laying this out so I could see it visually. So I apologize for that.
Well, if you can, if you want help on doing that, we can do that later
Okay.
because this is an important idea. People will try to um cast aspersions on the Bible, saying this is a conflict. This is a contradiction. Did you know this is one of those passages they believe contradicts, where the Bible contradicts itself? And it's not, because when you put them together, it makes perfect sense, does it not?
Right.
If you don't put it together, yes, it certainly looks like it's a contradiction, but it's not. So back in Acts chapter 9, then.
Well, that makes a lot of sense because how that would just add to the authority he had growing up there. If he had just regular Joes helping him with this, uh, he would probably get some more resistance. Obviously, the text says he dragged them off. But if you stop and think about how they were Roman soldiers, that would have just added to Paul's authority and made it easier, you know? So that, huh, something new every day.
That's what Reba said.
Oh, I did not see that coming.
Okay, so back in Acts chapter 9, then, what we see is Paul being confronted by, or Saul being confronted by Jesus, and he falls to the earth and he hears this voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And he says, who art thou, Lord? I can't see you. Who are you? Who's talking to me? I mean, think about this. You're blind, and you suddenly hear this voice. You open your eyes, you can't see. Here's this bright light shining. Ah! You fall down to the earth. Somebody addresses you saying, Saul, Saul, you know my name. Who are you? I don't recognize your voice. Would you recognize his voice?
No.
No. Who's on tech? Acts chapter 9 is where we at, guys. Acts chapter 9 and verse 5. The Lord says, I am Jesus whom thou persecutest. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. What pricks do you suppose there were that Saul was going through, was kicking against? This is a term that is very definite to the farming community, by the way. No? No. No. I never. So what kind of pricks do you think he's talking about?
Well, would that be the Christian movement? Like all the signs that he saw, like particularly, I would think about the sign that he just saw was Stephen. That he uh not to say the soldiers saw what Stephen saw at his death, but Stephen saw the Lord Jesus, and he testified. So maybe that's part of the pricks that he's kicking against the testimony of Stephen and all the Christians that he's been throwing into prison. If they were faithful to the word, and Paul was doing this, or Saul at this time was doing this often, he would have heard about Jesus.
Well, first off, the word pricks, what we're dealing with is goad or a sharpened stick that is poking one. Um, and like I said, this is true to the farming community. This is as a ox driver is poking the ox with this sharpened stick to try to get it to go forward, perhaps even faster, but it's poking it to get it to go where the driver wants him to go. Okay, that's what the prick means. It's not a whip per se, but it's a poke. You don't steer an ox with reins. You poke it. That's the difference between driving a horse and driving an ox. The difference between driving an ox and driving a sheep. How do you do that? Well, with a sheep, you actually lead them. With an ox, you poke them. With a horse or a donkey, you use reins. And you turn the horse and donkey whichever direction that you want with the bit in their mouth. You don't do that with oxen. It's impossible. You use a sharpened goad, Goad. That's what Shamgar used to defeat. And remember, he was one of the judges. Remember, Sam says he's fighting against God. Remember that it's better to obey God than men. Yes. How do they do that over there? Do they actually use reins, Sam? You're right. I've never seen the Philippines drive a mud ox, but this is what in America this is what they used to do, and then this is what they used to do back in that time. Historically, we know from pictures and stuff, they used a sharpened stick to poke. So Jesus is pricking Saul's conscience. He's poking it.
Here's the type of sticks that they would use.
Mm-hmm. You'll have to bring up a big picture of one of them there, CJ. Make it primary.
Okay. Whoops. Oh, I can do this. Can you see that?
Somewhat.
Well, here's another picture on the side here.
Yeah.
Here's the one I was looking at. So yeah, it's a little jabber.
So Jesus is saying it's hard for you to kick against these pricks. Notice how far away from the actual ox that driver is. Did you see how far away he was? There ain't that ox is not going to reach the driver by kicking, is he?
Right. You want me to give that back? Sorry.
So, you can just briefly show that again, yeah. So, what would prick the conscience of Saul? How old do you think Saul was? He wouldn't be a 12-year-old. He wouldn't be a 20-year-old. But I can guarantee you that he would have been old enough to have lived through the events of Christ. They poke it. They drive it up and down the mountain. So they use goads, don't they? So there is for this Jesus, the events of Jesus. Okay, the events surrounding the death of Jesus. There is the events surrounding the day of Pentecost. These are well known. There are the events of how about the all the healings that went on with the apostles, the events of Ananias and Sapphira that went on while Saul was at the feet of Gamaliel. And then we have the events of Stephen and his stoning. But also, we have the account of each of these people that he has hailed, arrested, being thrown into prison. These people who would rather die for the sake of Christ than recant their faith. That is a powerful message. And Ezra, please have Mother tell Amos to stop riding in the yard. It's muddy out, and he knows that I do not want him tearing up the yard. And so Jesus said, it's hard for you to kick against these pricks. There's a mountain of evidence poking you.
And could you imply that he ultimately knows that's what he's doing?
I believe that, yes, he knows what he's doing. Because
Uh,
that's why Jesus said it's hard for you to kick against the pricks. You know the law. You know the evidence. You know the prophecies.
I mean, Paul was an expert in the law.
He was.
But,
Having been brought up at the feet of Gamaliel, he was an expert. He was a Pharisee of Pharisees.
and so we've been talking about these prophecies of Christ on Monday afternoons, which is a excellent study, and Paul would have probably read most, if not all of them. And so, could you imagine that maybe jabbing his mind, having doubts? And the text doesn't say he doubted, but it kind of makes you wonder what Jesus says here. It's hard for you to kick against the evidence here, Paul. Had Paul been toying with the idea, maybe I'm doing this wrong, but then you have the passage where he says, "No, that's not what I was doing. I thought I was doing right.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in all good
And
conscience."
all good conscience before God and man to this day. Um, the thing of it is that there was enough evidence, a mound of evidence, and it was enough to overwhelm Paul, especially when he stood before Jesus right here. A lot of times we may have the facts, all the facts that we need, but we refuse to listen to them because it's not what we want to do. So what we do is we shut our minds off to that which we don't want to see, that we don't want to hear. Isaiah said it, lest seeing they should perceive, hearing they should hear and understand, perceiving they should perceive with their heart, and they should turn and be converted, and I should heal them, Jesus said. So he's being confronted by Jesus, by the very man that he has been persecuting. And he trembles and he says, Lord, what would you have me to do? I love the Apostle Paul because the very moment that he is confronted, he immediately makes the change. Jesus says, it's hard for you to kick against the pricks. He's like, that's it, Lord. What do you want me to do? I'm yours. What am I supposed to do?
And then Jesus said, okay, you call me Lord, you're good, right?
Well, Jesus said you got to invite me into your heart, right?
No, that's not what he said. He didn't say you're good. He
He
said,
says you got to go pray, right?
well, he didn't end up praying, but that's not what Jesus said. Jesus said, arise, enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do. And
Doesn't it ever strike you as odd that Jesus said, go into the city and it'll be told you what you should do instead of telling Paul right then and there what he should do?
you know, could this be a case of what we saw last week? The angel didn't tell Philip the good news,
Hmm.
so, that's not Jesus's job anymore. He delegated his authority. He still has all authority, but you said you guys teach the gospel.
It's not that he delegated the authority, it is that he issued the command.
Right.
He set the responsibility upon his followers, not that he delegated any authority. You're pointing out, it's not that Jesus' job to tell everyone. Listen, Luke chapter 16. What does Abraham tell the rich man? It's not the job of Lazarus or someone else coming back from the dead to warn your brothers. They have Moses and the apostles, or the prophets, rather.
We are the vessels, Reba. Can we pause for a moment and catch up on the comments? We got some
Certainly, certainly.
good ones coming in. Let's
You
see.
start with Sam's there. He's got four of them right in a row.
Pa-
Five of them right in a row. Well, that first one was about the Bulls. Okay,
Uh,
right there. Go ahead.
Paul, he had all facts before him. He just missed it because of his zeal with ignorance. That's right. He had a zeal not according to knowledge.
And
Uh,
he makes that point.
right.
He makes that very point.
He said, I lived in all good conscience before God as to this day. He had the zeal. And so what we learn from that is just because you and I have a zeal, it doesn't mean we're doing the right thing.
Right.
Sam says humbling. I don't. Was that in reference to what?
What Paul did, he humbled himself, I think is what it is. Um, how he turned immediately. Sometimes man is exactly very slow.
That's
I,
right.
I don't use that other word because that's actually a euphemism for the DAMN. So I don't use that word. By the way, I will use that word in its proper use. We have there's an old saying that goes with that word. You know what it is?
What?
Said the toe to the sock, let me through, let me through. Said the sock to the toe, I'll be darned if I do. To darn means to fix via sewing.
Huh.
And that is how they fixed socks, is to darn the sock. I just thought you might find that interesting.
Didn't know that.
But people use that word as a euphemism for damn, and I will not use that word. Good night, sweetie. Okay,
When
go
uh,
ahead.
when when we make a visit and tell something, we better listen uh, to see
You
God.
see, God uses others to do His will by command.
Yeah,
Right.
uh, and we're gonna in fact see that in just a moment. Uh, not only did He send Jesus, or Jesus appeared, He used somebody else, didn't He? We
Yeah.
are the vessels. That's right.
Nice.
Go ye means go me.
Darlene says it is like the people of today. I believe that there are those who know the truth of God's word, but because of family, friends, co-workers, they will not do the right thing. Afraid they will lose friends and or people may say, "Do you mean you believe in that religion?" Well, that reminds me, Sister Darlene, of the old song, "Give me that old time religion, give me that old time religion, give me that old time religion. It was good enough for me. It was good for this here. Good for the Apostle Paul. It was good for the Paul. It was good for Paul. It's good enough for me." That's way before your time, CJ.
Since I thought of that, so the next week goes, God bless. Sylvie can come up with the proper meaning.
So we're sewing socks, are we, Sam? So men are sewing socks too slow. Night night. Sleep. I sweet dream. Love you. Peaceful rest. God bless. Good night. Have a good night. Have a good evening.
Cuteness overload.
Yep. Time for cuteness overload. All right, so let's try to get a few more verses before we actually quit for the night. So Jesus says, "Arise and go into the city, and it shall be told thee what thou must do." Jesus confronted Paul or Saul and said, "You need to go into the city, and it's going to be told you what you must do." And then he leaves the apostle, he leaves Saul for 3 days blind, thinking over his life to present, thinking over exactly what it was he had done, examining the evidence, examining everything that God had presented for him, and was pricking his conscience.
You think about all the people that might have been going through his head, giving their testimonies as they're being beaten and carried off. Uh, do you think there were some tears those past 3 days?
Oh, I think there was some definite heartache right there.
I mean, what did I just do? I took husbands, wives away from their children for something that I thought was right, and now I'm going, excuse me, something that I thought was wrong, and now I'm learning it. Learning it was right all along. What? I mean, how do you live with yourself after that? Some people would just go uh, into a ball of despair, depression, maybe even commit suicide in some cases. That messed up. Well, that's not what Saul did. He fasted, he prayed, uh, he uh, for 3 days fasted and prayed, and it's interesting that Saul prayed because I guess being Jewish, he would have known how to pray, and there was a Yahweh God, right? But there's now a new element to that, I guess, in his prayer now.
Well, when we look at it, David prayed unto the Lord.
Right.
We look at it and we see Hannah in the Old Testament praying unto the Lord. And so what is it about prayer? Is that something that is significant to the New Testament only? No. All prayer is talking to God, making supplication or request known unto God.
Right.
It was something, and there wasn't really any set pattern. Look at what you have in Jesus's parable of the Pharisee and the publican.
Right.
One looks up to God and says, "I thank you. I'm not like this guy over here, and I'm not like other men.
I
I
do all
fast and
this
I do
great
all this."
stuff. Look at me, God. You need me. You're so lucky.
And then you have the publican, which can't even look unto God, but beats his chest and says, "God be merciful unto me, a sinner." So, which one do you think prayed the better prayer? Jesus asked. And of course, they said, the publican went down to his house justified. So, I mean, we see that prayer is not something that is solely the the avenue of the saints, but it is something that is unanimous or synonymous with any religious devotion, regardless. Because we also see in the account of Elijah and the prophets of Baal, what happens? The prophets of Baal are crying and praying unto their God, asking him to answer them, and they don't.
Right.
Yet Elijah simply makes one little request unto God, and he consumes both sacrifices. So we see Paul doing that, but I also want to bring out another idea. O'Shea says Saul fully depended upon God's forgiveness, and that's true. Go ahead with Sam's.
Okay. After this, I want to get at something else too.
Sure.
Uh, and here's asking forgiveness. How? Oh, whoops.
I
How?
didn't do that.
How? How can be in you? How can he be in you and serve? It was a humbling moment. Think about your moment you came to Christ. It was submissive unto God. Uh, his God saved when he obeyed what Ananias told him. That is a sweet moment.
Reba says we realize that we have been living in sin. We then pray and do what is necessary to take those sins away. We should be praying every day. Amen.
Now, real quickly, there is a misconception over in John 9. Somebody said it was the account of the uh, blind man being healed. And they're talking about how Jesus was a sinner, and we know that God doesn't hear the prayers of sinners. and many have ran with that as an inspired fact, but we see that God hears Saul uh, with, with what he says to Ananias in verse 11. He tells him he's praying, uh, and then in Acts chapter 10, we see that God heard Cornelius. And so what's being done is John 9 is the Jewish misconception that they had worked up. Now God hears everybody's prayers. Like he's God, he can hear everybody's prayers. But he has only promised to answer the prayers of the saints. We only have that promise. He might answer somebody else's prayer, but he is not obligated by his word to do that.
That's a good point, and one that should be fully delved into on a different topic as well. Good point, though.
Sorry, that
No, no, I'm not saying that it wasn't wrong to put it here, but I'm just saying that for further information, for further study, we should go into that on a different.
right.
So. Now, I do want to close, I think, with something else from this. As we see Saul rising from the earth and going into Damascus, verses 7 through 9, he's 3 days without eating or drinking, and he's praying. He's going to be told what it shall be, what he shall have to do. But we move over to Acts 26 for a brief moment. And I want to focus in on verse 18. Jesus tells Saul, saying that his purpose was he was going to send him to the Gentiles, verse 17, to open their eyes and to turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan unto God, they may receive forgiveness of their sins and inheritance among them which are sanctified by faith that is in me. Now, think about this as we read that and as we recognize that this is Jesus's words to Saul, who is blind. Do you see the irony?
Yeah.
Do you see the impact that this message would have upon our brother Saul in the first century? That he's being sent to the Gentiles to open their eyes, and he cannot see. To turn them from darkness, and that's all that his world is for 3 days, unto light. And think how precious to Saul that light is when he receives his sight at the hands of Ananias.
I think Saul in those 3 days saw things more clearly than he ever did.
And it is a powerful testimony to what God can do, but also it's a powerful testimony to how much we depend upon all of our senses. Sometimes when we lose our sight or when we lose a sense, everything becomes clearer, becomes sharper. I use that to illustrate the point that for a while, that was weird. Okay, back in September of 2001, we had an event that shook this nation to its core. And everything came into sharp focus for a time. People lost a lot. Here, in this case, Saul lost a lot. He was shaken to his core. And through this period of blindness, he received instruction of God, and he received a much clearer vision, a much clearer purpose. And because of that, the world is a much better place.
That's right.
A much, much better place. So we're going to end there at verse 10, ready for verse 10 next week.
So we're going to leave Saul fasting, praying, without sight. If anybody was going to say a sinner's prayer to be saved, guess who it would have been? It would have been Saul. But that's not the end of his story.
And so we'll leave it there.